Hello students, in this video lecture we are going to discuss a very important poem by A K Ramanujan, and that is Small Scale Reflections on a Great House. Now about A K Ramanujan, I think you have already studied at UG level uh, that Ramanujan is one of the diasporic writers who left India in 1960s, and he became professor of linguistics and Dravidian studies at University of Chicago. Now, Indian sensibility is very much there in his writings, and we find that he tries to pour the Indian experiences in his poems. Uh, Staying in America, he's trying to recollect the memories from the past, and that is why memory plays a very important role in his poetry. And we have also the presence of the past in his poems. Very often we find that the poems are written in reminiscent mood. The more the poet lives and writes abroad, the more he becomes aware of his deep, Indianness. Uh, there's a very significant line which is spoken by Ramanujan regarding his language and content. He himself confessed that English and my disciplines, that is linguistics and anthropology, English and my disciplines give me outer forms, linguistics, metrical, logical, and other such ways of shaping experience. And my 30 years in India, my frequent visit and field trips, my personal and professional preoccupations with Kannada, Tamil, the classics, and folklore give me my substance, my inner forms, image, symbols. That he talks about the outer forms and inner forms. So sustenance comes from Hindu, this Indian background. Now the poet recreates personal, private, familial memories to overcome the sense of insecurity, rootlessness, and alienation caused by the forces of globalization, because he has left India and went to America. Now he himself says that past never passes, either the individual past or historical past or cultural past. It is with us. This is actually the statement made by him. And the family history is the very nucleus of his poems. Uh, in these relationships, we find nostalgia, pathos, irony, humor, and sympathy. Uh, Most of his poems reveal an assured identity of the poet with the family, which he very much needed after he settled down in Chicago, as I just told you. In the fabric of his poetry, home remains a central point that unifies the individual and the traditional. We can call his because he has written the very a number of poems are called family poems. So we can call his family poems as emotions recollected in tranquility, or recollection emotionalized in untranquil moments. When he became untranquil, he started writing the poems. There's so many family poems which he has written. You have already studied the poem Obituary, which is written on the death of his father. And at UG level, you have studied history, where he talks about the death of his grandmother and the greed of his aunts. Now, the use of present tense in here, just going to discuss the poem Small Scale Reflections on a Great House, which is published in Ramanujan's collection of poems called Relations in 1971. in this collection entitled Relations, don't get confused with another collection called Relationship, which is a collection of poems by Jayant Mahapatra, for which he was given the Sahitya Academy Award. I have discussed it in my video lecture on Jayant Mahapatra. This most of the poems which were published in Relations were based on the family members. He has written his poems on his father, mother, cousin, grandmother, house, and all that. Now, this poem, Small Scale Reflections on a Great House, was published in the collection of poems called Relations, which was published in 1971. In this poem, we have the use of present tense, and the use of the present tense highlight the presentness of the past, and how past and present are intricately linked to each other. Now, this poem is about an ancestral home, and this. Look at the title of the poem: Small Scale Reflections on a Great House. Small scale is the minute observation. He's going to discuss about house, the minute description about that house. So this poem describes the ancestral house. Now this house has a very peculiar nature, very bizarre or amorphous nature. Now, what was the bizarre nature of the house? What was the peculiar nature of the house? Things once found their way into the house, lost themselves among other things in the house that had also been lost long ago. What did the poet want to say? He said that the peculiar feature of the great house is that whatever comes into the house, it never goes. And then he gives a long list of those things which come into the house and never goes. So the house is overcrowded house. When you read the poem, you find out that to a certain extent you can compare this poem with V.S. Naipaul's masterpiece, House of Mr. Biswas. This is also prescribed in a course. The hero of Naipaul's novel, we have Mohan Biswas. Mohan Biswas staged at Hanuman House. And this house has more or less the same kind of, characteristic, though in that house, the, Mohan Biswas ultimately rebels and, builds his own house at the cost of his own, life. So this house has this kind of, nature. And in this particular poem, the poet used, there is a comic tone, ironic tone, humor is there. There are certain, touches of, emotions and seriousness also. Two important points which you will find in this poem is that he has used alliteration very frequently in order to give the rhythmic effect in the poem. And another technique which is used is of the enjambment. This technique, enjambment, that this occurs when a line is cut off before its natural stopping point. It forces the reader down to the next line. The ideas flows. The idea actually flows from one stanza to the other without the punctuation marks. So that is there, in this poem. So let us now discuss the poem, Small Scale Reflections on a Great House. Just take your text, and I will try to, the poem is quite, the poem is, quite simple. The poem is, written in reminiscent mood because he's trying to recall the memories from the past. Now, as I told you that family is the central point in the poetry of Ramanujan. Uh, it is said about Ramanujan's poetry that the family is for Ramanujan one of the central metaphors with which he thinks. This poem, in this poem, the poet describes his ancestral house, which is called Great House by him. Now, the word great is ironical because there is nothing great in this house. When you read the poem, you'll find out that he's talking about a Hindu joint family, crowded one, and there is nothing which is great about that house. So the word great is used in ironical sense. Now the title of the poem, Small Scale Reflections on a Great House. Small, minute kind of memories, minute observation on the house which is called great by the poet. Now the mood of the poet in this poem is reminiscent because he's getting nostalgic and recalling the memories from the past. We have the presence of the past in this poem. Uh, Now, we have ironic humor in this poem with outsiders' objectivity. We have, the poet is dealing in quite an objective manner. Now, just sometimes I think that nothing that ever comes into this house goes out. He recalls his house and he says that look at the amorphous or the peculiar or the bizarre nature of the house, that nothing that ever comes into this house goes out. That whatever comes in this house, it never it never goes out, as if it had the magnetic power. Things that come in every day to lose themselves among other things lost long ago, among other things lost long ago. Alliterate, beautiful use of alliteration. House having the retaining capacity. The house retains those items which come into the house. So those items which come into the house, they lose themselves among those items which were already lost among the lost items. So beautiful description that the house has a very bizarre nature. He gives a long list of those items which come into the house and then they lose their identity because they get lost into uh, you know in the piling of the lost items. He gives a first example. Lame wandering cows from nowhere have been known to be tethered. Tethered means tied. Now lame wandering means stray cows. Now if some cows are wandering outside, they have come from nowhere. Since they are there in front of the house has pulled them, they have come inside the house, they are tied, and then they are given a name in order to show that the cows belong to the house. Encouraged to get pregnant in the broad daylight of the street under the elders' supervision. Now they are also, encouraged to get pregnant in the broad daylight, and this is done under the elders' supervision. The girls hiding behind the windows with the holes in. Girls are not allowed to see this process. Now it is again, the poet is making here mocking at the hypocrisy of the Indian societies, where the girls are not allowed to go outside to see such kind of activity. But the girls, because that was supposed to be the taboo Indian society, but the girls are the girls are hiding behind the windows, and then they are peeping this. So this is, the lame wandering cows from nowhere have been known to be tethered, given a name, encouraged to get pregnant in the broad daylight of the street under the elder's supervision. The girls hiding behind windows with holes in them. Now the next, example he gives of the library books, unread library books, usually mature in 2 weeks and begin to lay a row of little eggs in the ledgers for fines. As silver fish in the old man's office room breed dynasties among long legal words in the succulence of the Victorian parchment. The next uh, item he discusses is unread library books. Books must have been borrowed by the family members from the library. Since they have come to the house, so how can they go outside? They will not be returned. So the poet says that the library books are there in the house, they are unread, nobody has read them. The word mature has been used maybe in one sense that, the books which were issued from the library for a certain period of time, the maturity period is over. So fines are also levied on the family members. They are not being read by the family members, and they are also not returned. So, we have the piling of the books, and in the books, we have also the worms, moving. And we have the dynasties, we have, look at this and begin to lay a row of little eggs in the ledgers for fine. So we have, the vermins are there in the books and they are laying eggs. Now, next item is this: neighbors' dishes brought up with the greasy sweets they made all night the day before yesterday for the wedding anniversary of a god. Never leave the house they enter. Now, in this here in this stanza, is talking about the Indian custom, and at the same time, he is talking about the plurality of religion and also the custom of Indian families, where on the festivals they distribute the sweets and the prasad to the different families. For example, during Diwali, if after the proper worship, the prasad is given to the different families. Now, on you see the wedding anniversary of a god, some puja was performed. Maybe Shivratri or some other puja was done by the people So on the wedding anniversary of a god, some prasad was being prepared by the people. So neighbors' dishes brought up with the greasy sweets they made all night the day before yesterday. So the prasad was brought by the neighbors to the family, to my family, the greasy sweets. But now look at this line: never leave the house they enter. How can these dishes be returned to those neighbors? Because my house is peculiar. It will not be returned. So, lame wandering cows are there in the house, unread library books are there in the house, and now the neighbor's dishes are also there in the house. So, we have the piling of these, items. Not only that, we have like the servants. Servants are also there in the house. Servants, once entered the house, they never go outside. This is again a very, good thing, because servants usually leave the house. So, but my house, once the servant has come, he will never go. The phonograph, the gramophone, and then in this line, the epilepsy is in the blood. Now we have the touch of pathos, because he's talking about this disease, epilepsy. Now, the disease, which is epilepsy, actually, it is passing from generation to generation, because it is in the blood. So here you see we have the touch of pathos. Pathos is added to the narration when he's talking about epilepsy, which runs in the family, and it is passing on from one generation to the another generation. But again, he discusses sons-in-law. So pathos is the touch of pathos is there. Then the comic tone starts. So we have comic, ironic, description. Sons-in-law. So here we have the comic description. Sons-in-law who quite forget their mothers. Sons-in-law who have become the part of this family because they are married to the daughters of this family. Since they have come to the house, during the period of the marriage, so how can they go outside? They are staying here, they have forgotten their mothers. Sons in law who quite forget their mothers. They have forgotten their mothers. But stay to check accounts or teach arithmetic to nieces. But these sons-in-law in Indian tradition, actually they consider themselves very important at in-law's house. So they cannot do the indignified work there at the in-law's house. So what will they do? They have to justify their stay there at the family. What will they do actually? To stay to check accounts or teach arithmetic to nieces. They're justifying their stay at the family. They're teaching arithmetic to the nieces and also checking accounts. Now, sons-in-law staying there in the family, or women who come as wives from houses open on one side to rising suns or another to the setting, accustomed to wait and to yield to monsoons, to the mountains calendar, beating through the hanging banana leaves, and also anything that, yes, beating through the hanging banana leaves. Now he's talking about those women who have come as wives in this house. They have also forgotten their own house, what we call Maika. They never go there. They never go there. They stay here. They stay here and perform all the rituals of this house. They never go back to their house. So we have a long list of those things actually, which once come to the house, they never go. And also anything that goes out will come back. Now then he has started describing about those items which, if they are sent actually from this house, they ultimately come back. He gives one example. And also anything that goes out will come back, processed and often with long bills attached. If you send anything outside, it will ultimately come back to the house with long bills attached. He gives one example. He said, like the hooped bales of cotton shipped off to individual Manchesters and brought back, milled and folded for a price, cloth for our days, middle class loins and muslin for our richer nights. He gives the example of the hooped bales of cotton, which once sent to the Manchester ultimately came back to the house. Then he gives the examples of letters. If you have posted any letter from this house, letters mailed have a way of finding their way back with the many redirections to wrong addresses and red ink marks earned in Tiruvalla and Sialkot. Then he started talking about the letters which, if posted from the house, will ultimately come back to the house after so many redirections and red ink marks. Maybe you see that if address is not found, so it is written in red ink that this is not found with many redirections and all that. Once casually mentioned somewhere, they come back to the door as and ideas behave like rumors. Ideas behave like rumors. Once casually mentioned somewhere, they come back to the door at prodigies born to prodigal fathers with eyes that vaguely look like our own, like what uncle said the other day, that every Plotinus we read is what some Alexander looted between the malarial rivers. Now, He, he says that ideas turn into rumors. Uh, you know, their own ideas and philosophies return to them transformed beyond recognition. Then he says that he talks about a beggar. A beggar once came with a violin to croak out a prostitute song, a very vulgar, filthy song. He was singing in a very harsh and jarring tone. Now that song entered into my house. It was heard by my voiceless cook, and very surprisingly, that our voiceless cook sang all the time in our backyard. My cook is singing that vulgar song sung by the beggar every time in the backyard. That is, uh, you see, look at the peculiar and bizarre nature of the house. Nothing stays out. Now, daughters, obviously will get married to others. So daughters are also married. So what happened after the marriage of the daughter? Since daughters belong to this house, so how can they stay outside? Ultimately, they will come back to the house. Nothing stays out. Daughters get married to short-lived idiots. Daughters who were married to the persons, they were the short-lived idiots. So ultimately, they returned back to their houses. Sons who run away come back in grandchildren who recite Sanskrit into approving old men or bring betel nuts for visiting uncles who keep them gaping with anecdotes of unseen fathers, or to bring Ganges water in a copper pot for the last of the dying ancestors rattle in the throat. Now he's talking about those sons who ran away from the house. Ultimately, they came back with grandchildren who recite Sanskrit slokas to the approving old men. Then he talks about that Ganges water in the copper pot, which is a ritual actually performed in Indian families. That Ganges water, which is given to the dying person. And though many times from everywhere, recently only twice, once in 1943, from as far as the Sahara, half gnawed by desert foxes, and lately, from somewhere in the north, a nephew with stripes on his shoulder was called an incident on the border and was brought back in plane and train and military truck, even before the telegrams reached on a perfectly good, chatty afternoon. These last lines, here the poet becomes a bit emotional because he's talking about a nephew, a family member who is, who died on the border actually. There, the return is quite, tragic. Now, a nephew with stripes on his shoulder was called an incident on the border and was brought back. He was brought back in plane and train and military truck, even before the telegrams reached on a perfectly good chatty afternoon. This was afternoon, and here, the dead body was brought. So, the ending becomes, quite emotional, and pathos is, also there. So what we find is that living at a distant place called America, he's yearning and deeply longing for the place actually, and he's reliving the past. He's recollecting the memories of the past, refreshing them, and the tone becomes comic. The tone becomes ironic. Humor is also there. You have already seen in the case of the poem Obituary, where the treatment is absolutely, unconventional. And you have already read the poem History, where the death of the grandmother is described, and at the same time, the greed of the aunts was also described. So we have, the beautiful description of a house which is called Great, by him, and really, these personal experiences which the poet is sharing are remarkable. And I remember, one statement by Frost. Robert Frost once said regarding the poetry that poetry is when an emotion has found its thought, and the thought here found words. Now, so this is basically the poetry, and he is also trying to universalize his personal experiences. So, this much is all about the poem Small Scale Reflections on a Great House. Thank you very much.